Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokemon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, the good news is that now that I'm back, we are going to be having this every Wednesday, so we are going to just get straight into it. There is quite a bit of fun news coming this week, which I'm going to fill you in on nice and completely. And then we're going to be starting our look at Plasma Blast. Now, as I'd done with the last couple, I'm not going to go through the whole set in one podcast, because when I did that before, we rocked about an hour, and it just got very, very long indeed. So, we're going to be hopefully doing a slightly shorter podcast. Today, I am going to be looking at the trainers and EXs from Plasma Blast. And then next week we'll do what I call my hidden gems. They're not necessarily hidden gems per se, but nowadays it's the EXs and trainers that get most of the love, so we're going to put them in this podcast and give the rest a podcast all of their own. So the first piece of news that came out this week, and this actually came out last Thursday, just a day after I did the podcast itself, and this was the news that our November set is going to be the equivalent of Japan's EX Battle Boost. I.e., we are not going to be getting our X and Y set in November. However, as we are currently aware, there is not going to be a Japanese X and Y set coming out in October when the games come out. So this doesn't necessarily mean that our and Japan's X and Y sets aren't going to become synced. What it does mean is there's going to be quite a break between Japan's EX Battle Boost and their X and Y set, if we are indeed going to have our sets linked. We just don't know at this stage. The way it was set up originally, it looked very much like, come October, games are released, Japanese set, English set, all good. Now that we're getting the equivalent of EX Battle Boost, that does lead to the question of, is Japan just going to wait for us, or are we actually not going to get synced at all? We don't know, quite frankly. It means we will get that lovely Excadrill EX, which I am salivating over as we speak. It means we will be getting a reprint of Gothitelle, and you can choose to be happy about that or not, as you wish. And it does leave us still open of the question of, are we ever going to get Meloetta EX? Now, since we don't have Seismitoad, it's, kind of neither here nor there. But for the collectors at least, we've never got their Meloetta EX. I'd quite like to see it. And the news kept coming thick and fast. Last Friday it was revealed that we are getting the Fairy type coming into the card game. Now, the advert does say X and Y on it, so we can probably assume, and this has not been revealed, but we can probably assume that the X and Y set, the first X and Y set, will introduce the Fairy type to the game. Now, we don't know when that X or Y set is going to be, and we have no other details other than that. Now, we actually rocked along for a little while before we had Darkness and Metal in 1999, and then between 1999 and 2012 there was nothing. 2012 introduced the Dragon type, which was weak to itself and had none of its own special kind of energy. Fairy, we have no details. We can probably guess that it won't have its own kind of energy because Dragon didn't, but there's nothing to say it won't. We will wait and see, I suppose. Any news, as always, will be coming to you as I get it. Now, there was also a Team Flare Grunt promo card which has been given out at the Pokemon Game Show in Japan, and this is a supporter card which allows you to pick an energy on the defending Pokemon and discard it. Like a Crushing Hammer that doesn't need a flip, but it's a supporter card. And I don't think it's actually very good here at all, because it only works for the defending Pokemon. Now, generally, what you want to do is knock out the defending Pokemon, especially as we are now really in a format where one-hit KOs are everything. And then, you would want to knock an energy off a benched Pokemon to prevent your opponent retaliating from that. That would ideally be what we would be looking for. So nowadays, when you're playing against Plasma and you play Enhanced Hammer, you'd want to knock out the active Pokemon and knock a Blend or a Prism off a benched Kyurem to make sure that they couldn't follow up your KO with a Blizzard Burn the following turn. So, moving on to other news that we have had this week. We got a name for our November set, Legendary Treasures. Now, that doesn't really tell us anything, and I, to be honest, probably just could have told you that earlier. Now, yeah, it's going to be called Legendary Treasures. Now, there have been, I should say, X and Y starter decks that I told you about before, which have been released in Japan. Whether we're going to get them as part of our Legendary Treasures set, we don't know. It may well be waited till X and Y. I couldn't tell you. And in the final piece of news for this week, I told you there was a fair bit, we have had some new promos, etc., been announced. Now, firstly, we are going to be getting Chespin, Fennekin, and Froakie boxes. They're the 3 starters from Pokemon X and Y. And in each of them, you're going to be getting a figurine of whichever one you choose, Fennekin, Froakie, or Chespin. You are going to be getting a holo promo card of Fennekin, Chespin, or Froakie, and, you know, because their evolutions aren't going to have actually been released at that point, I would strongly recommend that you don't put them in decks for the time being. But you never know, they might turn out to be, you know, decent basics when these Stage 2s come out. Although, from what we can see, they seem to have an attack that does 10 damage for 1 energy. They don't look great. And you will be getting 3 Black and White Series packs. There we go. Nice and simple. Now, what's also been released... it hasn't been released, but what has been announced is a blister pack. Now, this is like we've been having for a long time. You get 3 packs, but now, instead of getting a coin and a promo card in these particular ones, you're getting metal pins, either a Chespin, Fennekin, or Froakie pin. Now, personally, I think this is pretty funky. I, like a lot of people, like wearing baseball caps. These will go on the baseball caps, and you can show your affinity for whichever X and Y starter you like. However, for those of you that collect promo cards, you probably don't want the blisters with a pin instead of a promo card. I like it. I think it's a nice, funky change. If you're really into the promo cards, I can only apologise. But it has been announced that all of these, both the boxes and the blister packs with the pins, will be released on October the 12th. Now, if that date sounds familiar, it should. It is indeed the date which X and Y are going to be released around the world. So you can go and get X and Y, and you can get yourself a Froakie, Fennekin, or Chespin pin, and promo card, and figurine, all on the same day, if you so wish. In little news, if you go back to my YouTube channel, if you haven't gone on the YouTube channel yet, I do heartily recommend that you go and check it out. Just go onto YouTube and search PTCGRadio. There's been a series of free games I've put up there with my new Darkrai list, my post-rotation Darkrai list, finishing with a fairly epic mirror game against a Darkrai running Landorus, Terrakion, Crushing Hammer, and Laser, which shall we say it was a less than favourable matchup. I have got some awesome games recorded. I've finally given in and gone to Blastoise. I'm going to get commentary done for them and get them uploaded as soon as I'm able. My secret projects for my YouTube channel I'm also working on over this week and next, and I will update you as and when they are ready. So, for the second half of today's podcast, we are going to be looking at Plasma Blast. Now, this is a new set which has just come out, and we're going to be going through the trainers and the EXs today. Now, I suppose before I get into this properly, I should tell you that, as I popped out on my Twitter, and I believe I've mentioned on the podcast before, but not last week, I judged for the first time this past weekend. I went down to Sutton Coldfield, and everyone was very lovely, made me very welcome, and I judged a pre-release. Now, obviously, pre-releases aren't the hardest things in the world to judge, but thank you to everyone there who made it such an enjoyable and pleasant experience. I did have some fun with the juniors, including a game where a junior put a Tortuga in their deck without any kind of fossils and then started with it. We ran out of water energy and made up some proxies to put, just little paper proxies, to put in a sleeve with any other card. And we had some juniors using unsleeved decks with just pieces of paper, and other juniors putting them in sleeves without another card back in it, so it was really, really thin. Luckily, all of this got picked up before anything bad happened, and the games were run in a very professional manner. Weren't many rulings to give, but I was a little bit disappointed at the gentleman who started looking up a ruling on his phone during a game. Although he did later apologise when I reminded him that That's why tournaments have judges. But a very well-run tournament, and everybody left it happy and with some fancy new cards. So, let's start off then with the EXs. Now, I'm going to leave Virizion and Genesect towards the end for fairly obvious reasons, and we're going to start off with the new Kyurem EX. Now, we had Kyurem EX back in the very first set in Next Destinies. We've since had 2 black Kyurem EX and 2 white Kyurem EX, and an alternate art promo of one of each of them. So I suppose it's only fair that we get a second Kyurem EX. Why we don't have a Suicune yet, don't know. Similarly, we're missing a bunch of other legendary Pokemon. But never mind. Regirock and Regice, I fear you're going to get left out in the cold. Why we only got Registeel, I might never know. So, the Kyurem EX was an absolute beast at the pre-release. The reason he was such a beast at the pre-release is because he has an outrage attack. It does 30 damage plus 10 more damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon, and it does that for just 2 energy. Now, in a pre-release, it's pretty much impossible to one-hit KO this bad boy. I believe there may have been an Aggron that could do this, and similarly, if anyone was lucky enough to get a Genesect with a G-booster, they could have done that. But other than that, it pretty much wasn't happening. Actually, the Aggron could only do 180 with weakness, and there was also an Escavalier, 160 with weakness, and there was also an Escavalier, which could only do 160. So, yeah, he was pretty much going to stay around and do some damage, and he was a little bit overpowered at the pre-release. Outside of the pre-release, he's not that amazing. Now, he does have his outrage attack, which is good, but as I mentioned back at the beginning of this podcast, we're moving toward... I'm going to talk more about the format and the big decks in the coming couple of weeks. But for now, suffice to say, we are moving into a format of one-hit KOs. Things like Hydreigon and Blastoise with Black Kyurem EX and Plasma, etc. And that's what really is going to damage Kyurem EX. Now, the fact that he's got a Metal weakness is wonderful, because with Cobalion Noble Victories rotating out, and the Plasma deck losing the Shift Gear Klinglang, Metal, it's pretty much redundant now. The Metal is not having a good time. We still got the Plasma Clang, but without the Shift Gear Klinglang, all you've got is Plasma Clang, and I don't think that Cobalion EX is good enough without regular Cobalion. It does have 180 HP, which is just much, much harder to get rid of than the 170, especially by Plasma, but I don't think it's quite good enough. The second attack goes back to my insistence on Pokemon's obsession with doing 150 damage. For 2 water and 2 colourless energy, you can do yourself 150 damage, discarding 2 water, but we all know that Blastoise doesn't really have a problem with superior energy retrieval and regular energy retrieval, getting this energy back from the discard pile. The problem here is it's doing 150 and you need it to do 180. Now, that's not a problem for most decks because they can play a Virbank Laser combination, and that'll give you the extra 30 damage. The problem is that when you're running Blastoise with your superior energy retrieval, your stage 2 line, your multiple tropical beaches, I don't really see the space here. And with Virizion out, less people are going to be playing Hypnotoxic Laser. I'll tell you how he blocks it in a minute, if you don't already know. Which means that less people are going to be playing their own Virbanks, which means you can't even just play Laser and hope that someone else puts a Virbank out. To be honest with you, I'm not loving Kyurem EX. If a second attack did 170 or 180, I'd be all over it. But it doesn't. It does make a nice alternative to Keldeo EX as an attacker in a mono water version of Blastoise, so you just run straight water and you don't muck about a black Kyurem EX, but I think the lack of one-hit KO potential is going to ruin that just a little bit. So, moving on, we have a very interesting but very fragile EX in Jirachi EX. Now, Jirachi EX is a metal Pokemon, and let's face it, it's got 90 HP. It's also got an attack for 3 energy, 1 of which is a metal, 2 of which are colourless, 60 damage. Jirachi and the defending Pokemon are both asleep. Now, if that did 90, then maybe you could justify it. That doesn't even one-hit KO a Kyurem, for goodness sake. It's terrible. The attack is bad, and it's got 90 HP, and it gives up 2 prizes. Now, it does have an ability, Stellar Guidance. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, you may search your deck for a supporter card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Shuffle your deck afterwards. So this turns any Level Ball, Ultra Ball, Master Ball, if you're that silly, into a supporter card. In fact, about the only thing it doesn't use, Plasma Ball and Heavy Ball don't work with this. The problem is really that it's a 2-prize bullseye on your bench, and that's just not good enough. Now, the extra consistency boost is a huge bonus here, as is the fact that you can run, for instance, one Iris or one Caitlyn, or you could run a selection of supporters here, so you could get the right one. Run a single Colress if the bench is full, whack down your, or if you've got one space and they've got a bunch of Pokemon out, whack down your Jirachi, get your Colress. You're going to be getting a lot of cards. There are some decks, especially things like big basic decks, which have always struggled with consistency in late game ends, etc., where this could be a huge asset. Not only that, but it is the added consistency boost. It is the fact that you can get whichever supporter you want. That's both huge bonuses. Also, if you've already got attackers built up, you could bench your Jirachi EX, get a supporter, and if they get 2 prizes off your Jirachi, they're not taking out your attacker. In the same way, nobody really attacks the Deoxys in a Plasma matchup because you're not getting rid of the attacker. Now, obviously, there's 2 situations where Jirachi is really bad. Firstly, if you start with it, this is an EX that can get donked, for goodness sake, but even if it doesn't get donked, you're still basically giving your opponent 4 prizes to take, because the 2 of them are already going to be a given. Now, when we've got Hypnotoxic Laser, cards that allow non-EX Pokemon to do more damage to an EX, 90 HP just isn't enough. The other situation where you really don't want Jirachi down is towards the very end of the game, because although I've said that your opponent is going to take out your attackers, not your Jirachi, what they are going to do is take your Jirachi as the last 2 prizes. They take 4. Don't want to take your attacker, get a catcher, kill the Jirachi. Now, people are going to make use of Jirachi, but it's just not durable enough for my liking. Now, before we get on to Virizion and Genesect, there are 2 Dragon EXs in this set. There's Palkia, and there's Dialga. We're back to Diamond and Pearl days. Unfortunately, this is not the Dialga G Level X and the Palkia G Level X, which were used so successfully back in the SP days. These 2 pretty much suck. So what have we got? Palkia EX is he's an EX. He can do Dragon, 180 HP, Weakness to Dragon, 2 Retreat, all fairly standard. For free energy, it can do 50 and switch back to the bench. 50 doesn't really do a huge amount, it only does 100 to Dragon Pokemon. And Dragon isn't really that relevant. It's not like people are desperate for a Dragon attacker at the moment. Rayquaza's pretty much dead because Eels is gone, and I know people are talking about Rayball, but with Blastoise and with Plasma Kyurem around, I don't see Emboar being particularly relevant anymore, if he ever was. I suppose he was back in Magnaball days, but that's about it. So you could use this with Gothitelle as the old style kind of hit and retreat deck, like Vilegar back in the day, Cursegar, back in the day. Gengar, which went back behind a Vileplume. And we are going to be getting a Gothitelle reprint in our Legendary Treasure set, or whatever it's called, coming in November. But I just don't see 50 damage as enough. Even if you are blocking trainers afterwards, Excelgor is much better. It's also got Dimension Heal, which does 80 damage and heals 20 damage for each plasma energy attached to this Pokemon. In theory, could be doing 80 and healing 80 a turn, but again, we're in a format full of one-hit KOs, and the cost here is a Grass, a Water, and 2 Colourless. Now, I suppose what you could do here is run this with Blastoise and run it with Grass Energy, so you could just do Water, 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 Grass. But why you would be running this to do 80 damage rather than a Black Kyurem EX to do 200 for the same cost, I don't know. And I know you don't have to discard energy like you do for Black Kyurem, but so I don't like Palkia EX. Now, maybe someone's going to come along with an awesome rogue which takes advantage of it. Good luck to them. I will report back on the podcast if that happens. I just don't see it happening. The Dialga EX I like more. it's got the same kind of stats, 180, dragon, weak to dragon, 2 retreat, etc. The first attack is interesting if not good. For a psychic, a metal and a colourless, and that's a weird combination in itself. Reverse edge, 50 damage. Flip a coin if head, put a card from your discard pile into your hand. Now if we had Fliptini, and we don't anymore, but if we did have Fliptini, this would be better. Where's Fliptini been reprinted? I will get back to you, I can't remember if it's been reprinted or not. But it does 50 damage. It allows you to put a card from the discard pile back into your hand. This could be your race spec. This could be a supporter, a needed tool scrapper, or something along those lines. Now, it's not a brilliant attack, but it's interesting, and I can see people doing fun stuff with this. I just don't... I don't know. I just don't see it being that particularly amazing. Now, the second attack is very, very interesting. This does for 4 colourless energy. Now this is good because it means it can be splashed into any deck you like. It's got an attack called Fast Forward, and this says for each plasma energy attached to this Pokemon, discard the top card of your opponent's deck. It does 90 damage. Now, in theory, on possibly the best turn ever, if you could rock a plasma energy in 3 Chorus Machines, or just 4 Chorus Machines, you could be doing 90 damage and discarding 4 cards. And then you keep doing 90 and discarding 4 cards. It will one-hit KO an EX, which is weak to Dragon, which is a huge bonus. Not only that, but, you know, you can be milling quite nicely. And, I mean, milling... We don't have the noble victories to rant anymore to mill, I know that for a fact. But there's just something about the milling which... It's not going to be a mill deck. It's not going to be the kind of thing you can rock that much. What you can do is use it as a kind of... as an annoyance, as a disruption kind of thing. Whether it's particularly viable, I don't know. And I like the look of this, I really, really do. I love the 90 damage, it's a good 2-hit KO on anything. Similarly, I like the milling effect, but plasma energy is very, very... it's very precious in plasma decks. And I don't like the idea that... I don't like the idea that all your plasma energy is going to be going on to one Pokemon. And again, it's something you're going to be hearing about for the next year, and I can only apologise for how often I'm going to be bringing this up. We are in a one-hit KO format. Plasma can now one-hit KO 170 HP EXs far more easily. You've got Genesect EX with G-Boost that can one-hit anything, Black Kyurem EX that can one-hit anything, Hydreigon with the Bangle which can one-hit, etc, etc, etc. So yeah, not great. So, that's all the other EXs. Now it's down to Virizion, and it's down to Genesect, and I suppose we should go through this, really, shouldn't we? So, Virizion and Genesect, they do make their own deck. You'll see why in a minute. So we're going to start off with Virizion. Virizion's a support Pokemon. It's got a very interesting attack, which for 2 grass energy does 50, and it allows you to attach 2 grass energy to one of your benched Pokemon from your deck. Now do bear in mind it is 2 to 1 Pokemon. You cannot just attach 1 energy each to 2 different Pokemon, and once your opponent's trying to do this, it's exactly the kind of thing people will get wrong in tournaments. 50 damage is alright. Grass weakness with Suicune, with Terrakion, or the Suicune I suppose is immune to Virizion unless you've got a Garbodor out, with Blastoise, etc. It's a decent typing to have nowadays. And attaching 2 energy from a deck is amazing. If you can get a turn 1 and turn 2 Emerald Slash, you're probably going to be keeping out of energy attachments for the rest of the game, which is wonderful. The problem is, this is your setup attack. And you'll probably be running Chorus Machine for your Genesect EX anyway, because Genesect EX is a Plasma Pokemon. Virizion is not. So you are going to need a Plasma Badge, and a Chorus Machine, and a Grass Energy on turn 1 with Virizion in the active. That is not an easy thing to accomplish. So do bear in mind that you're probably not going to be getting the turn 1 Emerald Slash, and you might get it occasionally, but you're probably not going to be getting the turn 1 Emerald Slash. What this means is that you are going to be rocking, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult to get that turn 1, which means you're going to be using your setup attack on turn 2. Now, if you're playing against a Plasma, they're going to be going for a turn 2 Blizzard Burn, and if you're just using your setup attack and then they get their Blizzard Burn and they're starting to pepper energy around the field, you could find yourself in a little bit of problem, shall we say. Is that fair? I think that's fair. The Fliptini, I believe, it is still in the format. It should be released in the EX Battle Boost. But Victini is actually released as a couple of different promos, so we should be seeing it carry on. Even if it is gone out, it'll be back very, very quickly, so don't worry too much. He's coming back. So going back to Virizion EX, good, but do bear in mind that setup attack is more often than not going to be coming on your second turn. If you go first, not a big problem. If you go second, it is. So, it's got a fire weakness, not all that relevant. People are talking about Embor, but I think there's too much water for Embor, like I've already said. Flareon could give this deck a bit of trouble, but Flareon, I don't know how many people will seriously be using it. Dylan Bryan did have a very unique list that managed to get to top 16 at Worlds, so maybe people will be ripping that off, but otherwise Virizion probably shouldn't be killed like that. He has got resistance to water, which is huge, because Kyurem with Bangle and a couple of Deoxys would be able to one-hit. Now he's not going to be able to because of the water resistance. And you never really want to be putting down 4 Deoxys at once. What's really good about Virizion EX is its ability Verdant Wind, which says that each of your Pokemon that has grass energy attached cannot be affected by special conditions, and if you attach grass energy, it kills all existing special conditions. This is wunderbar. It means that the Virizion Genesect deck is effectively immune to lasers. You stick it into Darkrai Hydreigon. Darkrai Hydreigon is basically immune to lasers because you're using that blend energy. Dark and Grass being on the same blend energy. To be honest, when you're running a Plasma deck, when you're running 4 Prism anyway, you can probably get away with putting a Virizion in there to protect some of your attackers. So it's brilliant as part of the Virizion Genesect deck, and I'm not going through the deck in detail today. The decks are coming next week. But what this will do is be an amazing tech, as well as being right at the heart of one of the new, possibly best decks in the format. Going along with Virizion's good, it sets you up, it's got a good ability, it doesn't win you the game. What does win you the game is Genesect. Now, he's got 2 A-Spec trainers, which I'll get to in a moment. I've covered them before on the podcast, but I'll get to them in a moment. He's got an ability, Red Signal, attach a Plasma from your hand. This does not work with Colress Machine, I want to make that very clear. Colress Machine, attaching a Plasma from your deck, will not activate Red Signal. But if attached in your hand, it's a catcher. Now, again, you don't really want to be using your energy attachment for the turn for a Plasma. You want to be using Colress Machine to get the Plasma on. But it means if you can't find a catcher, but you can find a Plasma energy, that's good. If you're using Shadow Triad to get your A-Spec Trainer card back, because both the X-Spec Trainer cards are Plasma cards, and Shadow Triad gets one back from your discard pile, any Plasma card, it means you can use Shadow Triad to get a Plasma energy back, and that's like getting a catcher, which is wonderful. Now, its attack for 2 grass and a colourless is called Megalo Cannon. It does 100 damage and 20 to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. It's like Night Spear. I actually liked it less, because 90 damage times 2, 1 hits anything. 2 hits anything, I should say. You don't need the extra 100. Anything that's weak to grass is going to be 1 hit by 90 damage. You don't need the 100. The 100 is overkill. So I really don't like that. I would prefer the 90-30, but I suppose I'm being pinicky. 120 is pretty good. It means that you're 2 hitting anything, you're 1 hitting a lot of basics, and let's face it, you're putting 20 onto the bench. Now, can Blastoise survive with Virizion Genesect? I think it's only fair to look at that when we look at Virizion Genesect matchups next time. Over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be going into the format in quite a lot of detail. By the way, with things coming up, with tournaments, with the season starting again, really, I received a very interesting email from a lovely gentleman recently asking how to get into the competitive scene, and I'll be doing a little feature on that in the near future. So they are the 6 EXs. What we're going to do now is we're going to quickly run through all of the trainers, and then I'm going to leave you to it. Now, We have reprints of Pokemon Catcher, Professor Juniper, Rare Candy, Plasma Energy, and Ultra Ball, and Cover Fossil, and Plume Fossil, and Energy Retrieval. I ain't going for any of them. You know 'em. But it's nice that we got Rare Candy, Catcher and Ultra Ball. It makes it more available, same with Juniper. What this does mean is that Catcher and Juniper are in the format for longer. I'm going to let you decide whether you think that's a good thing or not. Now there are two new supporters in this set. Caitlin and Iris. Caitlin says, put as many cards from your hand as you like on the bottom of your deck in any order, then draw a card for each card you put to the bottom of your deck. Now firstly, it helps you to get fossil cards on the bottom, that's pretty good. This really is exclusively for Stage 2 setup decks, because you want the Rare Candy in the Stage 2. So what you do is say you've got a hand, say you beach, draw 7 cards, you've got a candy but you don't have the Stage 2. You draw a card, you've got an 8 card hand. You keep the candy in your hand, you put all other 7 cards back under your deck, and then you draw 7 cards. Firstly, you're not getting those 7 cards back. It's not like an Enna or Colress which puts those cards back into your deck to be drawn again. They are back in your deck but they're at the bottom, they ain't coming out. And then you've got 7 chances to draw it back. That's where Caitlin comes in. Now, the bad thing about Caitlin is you don't get a net gain of cards. So with an N, you play your hand down to 2, you play the N, you shuffle 1 card back in, you draw 6, you've got a net gain of 5 cards. Juniper, you're gaining 7 cards, etc. With Caitlin, you're actually not gaining any cards, because you're only getting as many as you put in, and you're losing the Caitlin. So you're actually getting 1 less card than was in your hand, which means you're not filling your deck, which will make you more susceptible to late game ends. Caitlin is very good for Stage 2 decks. It's going to be the kind of thing that people use unexpectedly. It can be good. I mean, it's terrible off a late game end. It won't do you anything. You'll put like 1 card underneath and pray. And even then, as a supporter, you won't be able to play because Caitlin is a supporter. But it's good on the first turn. It's not a bad card. Whether you can find space for it, that's a different thing. Now, Iris reminds me of Black Belt from back in Triumphant. During this turn, your Pokemon's attacks do 10 more damage to the active Pokemon for each prize card your opponent has taken. I.e., if your opponent's down to 1 prize, your attacks do 50 more damage to the active. If your opponent's taken no prizes, Iris does nothing. Now, it's not a card you can run in great numbers, but I would say this is something like Silent. Silent ain't going to be your turn 1 supporter that you're desperate for. It's going to be, I've got a Blastoise or an Emboar out, I want free energy. I can afford to use my support for that this turn. It's going to be kind of a one-off in certain decks, especially slower decks. Maybe you run a Jirachi with 1 Iris, so you can search it out when you want. Maybe you play it with Random Receiver. I don't see Iris seeing a lot of play, but I love Iris because it's the kind of thing you can drop out of nowhere and your opponent might not see it coming. Your opponent might think, excellent, even if he's playing a Bangle, I've still got 20 HP left. And then you drop a Bangle and an Iris and your opponent starts crying. It's not something that I'm rushing to put into all of my decks at the moment, but I think it is something which you could very nicely play around with as a one-off. But I don't think it would ever really be more than that, because you don't want Iris to be your lone supporter on turn 1, and even if it's not, you know this is the kind of card that's just going to keep getting Junipered. It's kind of a bit like Scramble Switch. It might win you the game, but then you might go for the rest of the tournament without using it at all. So they're the new supporters. There's a few new item cards. Actually, except for Ace-Specs, there are 3 new item cards, and they are all absolute doozies. Now they're all tools. This is a real tool set. This set is going to basically... we've still got the Stadium War thing going on a little bit, but this is going to turn into a tool war. We've still got Tool Scrapper. Tools in this set are big uns. So Reversal Trigger. When the Team Plasma Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack, not active, any Pokemon, search your deck for a card and put it into your hand. Now, this can be circumvented by knocking a Pokemon out by poison or by placing damage counters, or by tool scrappering it before the Pokemon gets knocked out. But what this basically means is you search for any card. It's like a computer search. It's wonderful. Now, it's not being played in huge numbers from what I've seen because it's very situational. It's not the kind of card that you get to control. Your opponent is a person that's going to be knocking it out. Therefore, your opponent is going to be knocking out your Pokemon, so it's your opponent that chooses whether you get to use this. They can capture a different Pokemon, they can tool scrapper it, they can knock you out with poison or damage counters. If you get to use it though, wunderbar. Now, the next two really open up the format. They are wonderful cards which I am very glad have been printed. Silver Bangle. The attack of this Pokemon, the attacks of the Pokemon this card is attached to, excluding Pokemon EX, do 30 more damage to active Pokemon EX. What that means is, if you attach it to a non-EX, you do 30 more damage to an EX. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Your Kyurem is now hitting EXs for 150 without Deoxys or Laser. Your Hydreigon can be hitting for 170 onto any EX. Your Absol, although you should probably be using Dark Claw on that to be honest, but your Absol can be hitting, if the opponent's got a full bench, you're going to be hitting 150 before Laser or Deoxys. What this means is that non-EX Pokemon can start standing up. We've had a format for too long of Pokemon which are just EXs bullying the format. What this means is that non-EX Pokemon can start standing up again. Now, I don't think that we're going to have Garchomp, Altaria and Empoleon rocking through the format, but we are going to have Pokemon like Sork, more on him next week, and Absol and Kyurem really being the most important cards in a deck. And we might be moving away from knockout 3Xs for the win, because more people are going to be running non-EX decks. The other trainer, and this is again a tool, is Silver Mirror. Prevent all effects of attacks, including damage, done to the Pokemon this card is attached to, excluding Pokemon EX, by your opponent's Team Plasma Pokemon. So again, this doesn't work with EX Pokemon. You attach Silver Mirror to one of your Pokemon, and it's immune from Team Plasma Pokemon. How wonderful is that? Absolutely wonderful. That's what it is. It is absolutely wonderful. Because what it does is it means that we've got a real hard counter to Plasma. You get that down, no Team Plasma Pokemon can hurt you. It almost forces Team Plasma to play a Keldeo in their list, even if they don't want to, because, let's face it, otherwise you're going to have nothing to attack someone with a Silver Mirror. Now, these are wonderful, because what it means now is everyone's going to have to play Tool Scrapper pretty much because of Silver Mirror blocking Team Plasma, and remember that Genesect is a Plasma Pokemon, and Absol is a Plasma Pokemon. And Silver Bangle doing more damage to EXs. It means that you can, you can bait people by putting down a load of float stones, waiting for them to play a Tool Scrapper, and then putting down your Silver Bangle. It's turning it into a very tool-centered format, and I think it's going to be fantastic. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Now, there's 4 trainer cards to go, and I'm going to go through them nice and quickly, and then we're going to leave. We'll talk more about the format in the coming weeks. Firstly, we've got Master Ball. Master Ball lets you search for any Pokemon. It's good, but it's not good enough. It's actually not that good, to be honest. Team Plasma Ball does this in a Plasma deck, searches for any Pokemon. We've got Level Ball for less than 90 HP Pokemon, Heavy Ball if you've got a retreat cost of 3 or more, Ultra Ball that you can discard 2 cards, etc. Master Ball lets you search for anything, which might be good in like a Blastoise deck, for instance, but then in Blastoise you want Computer Search or Dowsing Machine, or maybe Scoop Up Cyclone. We'll get to that in a second. I see this as a good card, but as an A spec, I don't see it working. We used to have Luxury Ball, which let you search for any Pokemon that wasn't a level X, and you could only play 1 in your deck. I think Master Ball would be better like that. We've also got Scoop Up Cyclone. It's like a Super Scoop Up, but no flip. Put one of your Pokemon and all cards attached to it into your hand. Clearly, this is for Blastoise, or for Emboar. Pick up your Pokemon, pick up the energy, pop it down, put the energy back on, you are good to rock and roll. But again, I just don't like it as much. Because even in a deck like Blastoise, where you can get the energy down, you want to be running Computer Search or Dowsing Machine, not Scoop Up Cyclone. I like it, however, and I'm sure you're going to see some Blastoise players playing it. Once again, however, this is the kind of card which thrives where your Pokemon is half dead. And as I keep saying, and I'm probably going to keep saying, and I've apologised for that, we are moving into a format of one-hit KOs. It's not ideal for a card like this. And finally, we have 2 A-Spec Trainer cards, which are specific to one Pokemon. Now, we've seen this before with Crystal Wall and Crystal Shard for Black and White Kyurem EX, and for Victory Piece for Victini. But now we've got 2 for Genesect, and they are 2 for the very same Pokemon. Now let's get the bad one out of the way first. The bad one is G-Scope. This for 2 Grass and a Colourless, the same cost in fact that it takes to do Megalo Cannon, Genesect EX's regular attack. You get to do 100 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Going to make this very simple. A Pokemon that has a built-in catcher as an ability should not need an A-Spec to do 100 to the bench. Don't play G-Scope, G-Scope's terrible. What isn't terrible is G-Booster. G-Booster, same attack cost again, 2 Grass and a Colourless, 200 damage, discard 2 energy. This attack's damage isn't affected by any effects on the defending Pokemon. Suicune and Sigilyph Safeguard goes right through it. Eviolite, Giant Cape, oh no, not Giant Cape, sorry, ignore that. But Eviolite, it goes right through it. Anything goes right through it. Abilities and all that. The reason it doesn't go through Giant Cape, for those of you wondering, is because Giant Cape adds 20 HP. It doesn't reduce damage. Eviolite reduces damage. G-Booster says no it doesn't, this damage isn't affected. But Giant Cape adds 20 damage, and it basically says, well, brilliant, you're still doing 200, but I've got the extra 20. What I should point out, however, is that all Pokemon EXs have 180 damage or less, and 180 HP, so by the time you stick a Giant Cape on them, they've still got 200 or less, and they still get knocked out. This is what makes Genesect a potentially format-breaking card. This is a very, 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 very good attack. However, it does involve discarding 2 energy. You're not just going to go G-Booster, G-Booster, G-Booster game. You might get that lucky. But generally, you're going to have to get an attachment and a Colress machine in the same turn to keep using this, or you're going to have to use a couple of turns of Virizion going. If this gets Tool Scrappered, and as I said, everyone should be playing Tool Scrapper next format, if it does get Tool Scrappered, then what that's going to mean is you're going to need a Shadow Triad to get it back. Recycle doesn't work. You could use Dialga, but I doubt anyone actually will. But you're going to basically need a Shadow Triad to get this back, and you might not have this in your hand. So it's far from completely and utterly broken, but it's good. We'll talk about this deck more next week. Now, I should point out there's some secret rares in this set. There's a secret rare Execute, Virizion, Dusknoir, and the soon-to-be ridiculously overpriced, because it's going to be legal forever, Rare Candy. Rare Candy's been legal for years and years and years and will continue to be legal. They reprinted it here, give it a year or two, they'll reprint it again. They always do, they want it to be legal. So this Rare Candy, if you can, get them, because they're only ever going to go up in value, because they're going to keep getting rarer, but unlike things like Secret Rare Catcher, they're not inevitably going to get rotated out one day. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the EXs and the trainer cards from Plasma Blast. We're up to 42.5 minutes, so I don't want to keep you any longer. Next week, we're going to look at the non-EX, non-trainer cards, what I like to call the hidden gems. The ones that people might not have read quite so thoroughly. Thank you very much for listening as always. Please remember to check out my YouTube channel. Go on, search for PTCG Radio. There's some good Darkrai games up there. There's going to be some very, very good Blastoise games going up there in the very near future, hopefully in the next day or two. And there's a couple of secret projects I'm working on that are going to be going up there soon. I'll tell you about them on the podcast, but they'll be going up there soon as I get my editing skills up to scratch. Remember that if you want to get hold of me, you can in all the usual ways. You can tweet me at TheWassy. You can email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. Or if you're listening on SoundCloud or WordPress or YouTube, etc., just leave a comment and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Let me know what you think about Plasma Blast. Let me know if you disagree with anything that I've said, or whether you think a card is better or worse than I've made it out to be. Give me your opinions on the new Plasma Blast decks and cards. I love hearing from you. It makes me feel just that little bit less lonely. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.